The bar of justice against gun owners has just been raised, and what was once considered normal is now on life support. Your rights, as you know them, are hanging by a thread. This isn't just happening in Oregon. What happens here could set a precedent that spreads like wildfire across the United States, quietly rewriting the rules of gun ownership, without anyone noticing until it's too late. Gun owners across the country are watching, but most have no idea just how high the stakes really are. A single court case in Oregon is quietly challenging everything Americans have always taken for granted. The decision that comes next could silently change the rules for gun ownership, not just in one state, but across the entire nation. What seems local today could become the standard tomorrow. And if you think it won't affect you, you're about to find out how wrong you are.
Think about this for a moment. Decades of accepted norms, of the way Americans have owned and handled firearms, could be rewritten overnight.
The magazines, the training, the permits. You might believe you are safe, following every law, living responsibly. But what if the rules shift while you're looking the other way? What you once considered safe could suddenly become illegal. And history tells us that once a court sets a precedent, states don't wait, they follow. Every gun owner in America should feel the weight of this moment. This is more than politics, more than local legislation. It's a test of how far the legal system can go in redefining rights that were once considered fundamental. The tension in this case isn't just about Oregon. It's about what could happen next in your state, your city, maybe even in your own backyard. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this case could change the future of gun ownership in America, and why every gun owner, regardless of where you live, needs to pay attention. The question is, are you ready to see how deep this rabbit hole goes? Subscribe and hit the bell now, because missing this could cost you more than a magazine. Your rights could be next. Chapter 1. What is Measure 114? Measure 114 was passed in Oregon under the guise of public safety. On paper, it bans high-capacity magazines and requires anyone who wants to buy a firearm to undergo training and obtain a permit. At first glance, it sounds simple. A step to protect citizens, reduce crime. But the reality is far more complex, far more threatening than what's written on the page. The law doesn't just regulate, it changes expectations. It challenges what gun owners have long considered normal. High-capacity magazines, once a standard for self-defense and sport, are now classified as potential crime tools. Requirements that were optional or customary, like firearm safety courses, are now strictly mandated, and failing to comply could put law-abiding Americans on the wrong side of the law. Here's the twist. This isn't just a localized law. Courts across the nation are watching. Every state in America has legal teams analyzing the case, wondering if a similar law could take hold in their jurisdiction. A ruling in Oregon won't stay confined to Oregon. It could quietly ripple outward, shaping legal strategy and legislation in states hundreds or thousands of miles away. Think it won't affect your state? Think again. Every major legal precedent starts somewhere. It begins in one court, in one state, often quietly, without fanfare. Then, once a decision is made, it becomes a blueprint, referenced by judges, legislators, and lawmakers nationwide. Oregon could be the test case, the first domino in a chain that changes the rules for millions of Americans. And the twists don't stop there, because the arguments being made in court reveal layers that most gun owners never expected. This isn't just about safety or permits, it's about power, control, and setting a legal standard that could shift the balance between government regulation and individual rights. As you listen, keep this in mind. What seems technical or abstract now may directly affect your ability to buy, own, or use firearms in the near future. The law isn't waiting for debate. It's already in motion, quietly challenging norms that have been accepted for generations. Chapter 2. The Court Battle. The law is paused as Oregon's Supreme Court examines whether Measure 114 violates constitutional rights. Lawyers representing gun owners argue that this law fundamentally alters what has been considered standard practice for decades. What was once normal, owning standard capacity magazines, purchasing a firearm without an extra permit, is now suddenly subject to new rules, new restrictions, new interpretations. On the other side, the state argues that public safety justifies these unprecedented restrictions. They frame Measure 114 as a minor adjustment, a small step in the name of safety. But make no mistake, this is far from minor. This case is being watched closely because the court is considering more than just Oregon. They are weighing how this decision could influence other states. Here's the shocking part. If the court sides with the state, the legal precedent could give legislators across the nation a roadmap for similar restrictions. Other states are already preparing legislation inspired by Measure 114. Your state, your city. None of it is immune if this ruling stands. Lawyers defending gun owners emphasize that this isn't just about legality, it's about the erosion of accepted norms. The state's approach signals a willingness to use public safety as justification to redefine what is considered legal ownership. In other words, if this ruling goes the wrong way, law-abiding Americans could find themselves suddenly violating laws they never knew existed. By the end of this section, you'll understand why experts call this the most consequential gun rights trial in decades. Not just because of Oregon, but because of the domino effect it could trigger nationwide. Every gun owner should be paying attention, because the outcome could quietly rewrite the rules for all Americans. Chapter 3. Why it matters nationally. This case is about far more than banning magazines or requiring permits. At its core, it challenges the principle of what Americans are allowed to own, and how far the courts can stretch to redefine those rights. History has shown that state-level decisions often snowball into nationwide standards. Just look at rulings on concealed carry, background checks, or magazine capacity. They all started in one place, quietly, before spreading. Oregon could set a blueprint that other states will quietly emulate. If lawmakers see that a court upholds this type of regulation, it becomes easier to justify passing similar laws elsewhere. This is how change spreads, not through sweeping federal mandates, but quietly, state by state, law by law, silently shifting the landscape of gun ownership. Every gun owner in the U.S. is now on notice. Even if you don't live in Oregon, what happens there may soon affect your life directly. What was once considered standard practice could suddenly become illegal, and the definition of legal ownership may be redefined in ways you've never imagined. This section is critical because it shows that the fight isn't local. It's national. Oregon is just the first battleground. And as we go deeper into the legal arguments, you'll begin to see exactly why this case is being closely watched by legal teams and lawmakers across the country. Coming up next, the legal arguments that could completely reshape your rights, and the precedent most Americans haven't even heard about yet. Chapter 4. Inside the courtroom. Inside this courtroom, history is being rewritten, word by word, argument by argument to one side. State officials, arguing that public safety demands tighter control, to the other. Citizens, attorneys, and civil rights advocates claiming the Constitution is being quietly dismantled. But beneath the legal jargon and courtroom formalities, one question echoes louder than all others. Who gets to decide what reasonable means when it comes to your right to self-defense? Because if the judge's interpretation changes, even slightly, it could flip decades of precedent upside down. The state's attorneys argue that limiting magazine capacity saves lives, reduces mass shootings, and makes law enforcement safer. They say a 10-round limit is reasonable, and that the Second Amendment isn't without boundaries. But the challengers, they come armed, not with weapons, but with data, history, and the full weight of Bruin v. New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, the Supreme Court decision that reshaped the Second Amendment in 2022. They argue, if the founders didn't impose capacity limits, neither can modern politicians. Because rights don't shrink to fit new fears. And then, the judge asks a single question that freezes the room. If we allow this limit today, what's to stop lawmakers from setting it to 5 rounds tomorrow? Silence. No one answers. The question hangs in the air like smoke. Chapter 5. The historical battle line. The fight over gun rights has always been a fight over control, of power, not weapons. From King George's attempts to disarm the colonies, to Reconstruction-era laws aimed at keeping freedmen defenseless, every generation has seen its own measure to restrict the right to bear arms. But what makes Measure 114 different is the timing. It's not happening in isolation. It's happening at a moment when the federal courts are split, the Supreme Court is under pressure, and gun owners across the country are divided between outrage and fatigue. And Oregon might just be the testing ground for something bigger, a model law that other states are waiting to replicate if it survives the courts. Behind closed doors, states like California, New York, and Illinois are already preparing their own Oregon-style legislation, each one designed to see how far the Constitution can bend before it breaks. If Oregon wins this battle, it could open the floodgates for a new wave of restrictions nationwide. But if they lose, it could be the most important victory for gun rights since Bruin. Chapter 6. The National Stakes. Most Americans think this is just about Oregon. It's not. Because once the Ninth Circuit rules, the losing side is expected to appeal straight to the U.S. Supreme Court. And here's where things get chilling. This case could decide whether states can override the federal standards set by Bruin. If the court agrees to hear it, it won't just be about magazine limits anymore. It will be about the future of how Second Amendment cases are judged altogether. Right now, courts are split between two interpretations of Bruin. Some say the government must prove a restriction has deep historical roots. Others say new conditions can justify new laws. This case could settle that once and for all. So when we say your rights are on life support, it's not an exaggeration. Because whichever way this decision falls, it sets the rules for every future case involving self-defense, carry laws, and ownership rights in America. And the worst part? You probably won't hear about the outcome on the news until it's already too late. Chapter 7. The Fallout. The case hasn't even reached the Supreme Court yet, but the ripple effects are already being felt. Gun owners in Oregon describe a chilling uncertainty. Some shops have stopped selling standard magazines altogether. Others operate in a legal gray zone, one mistake away from a felony. Across the country, states are watching and waiting. California officials have hinted that if Oregon's Measure 114 stands, they'll expand their own bans even further. Illinois lawmakers are already reviewing similar language. And in Washington, D.C., a quiet group of federal policymakers sees an opportunity to use Oregon as proof that tighter laws can work. But on the other side, gun rights groups are mobilizing like never before. Lawsuits are being prepared. Fundraisers are surging. And behind the scenes, constitutional scholars are warning that this one case could redefine what "shall not be infringed" actually means. Because if the courts rule that limits like Oregon's are reasonable, that phrase could become the new weapon against the Second Amendment itself. In the media, the story plays out in two different worlds. One side paints the measure as a step toward common sense safety. The other calls it an assault on liberty disguised as reform. But the truth? It's neither black nor white. It's about precedent. And who controls it? Every lawyer in that courtroom knows. Once a precedent is set, it doesn't stay in Oregon. It spreads, state by state, until the exceptions become the rule. And that's exactly why so many people outside Oregon are suddenly paying attention. Because the experiment isn't just legal, it's political. And no one knows what the next version of this law will look like until it's already on the books. Here's what most Americans don't realize. Behind the courtroom drama, national organizations and donors are watching closely. They're funding research, lobbying judges, shaping public narratives. For them, Oregon isn't just a state, it's a proving ground. And if this works, they'll take it federal. Quietly, efficiently, permanently. So when people say, "This won't affect me, I don't live in Oregon," they're missing the bigger picture. Because the battle for your rights never stays local. Chapter 8. The Verdict and What Comes Next. As of now, the case has reached its most critical point. The judges have heard the arguments. The lawyers have rested. And America waits for a verdict that could either cement or shatter the foundation of gun rights as we know them. What happens next will either be celebrated as a constitutional victory, or remembered as the moment the Second Amendment took its final hit. No matter how the decision falls, one thing is clear. This is not the end, it's only the beginning. Because if Oregon's law is upheld, other states will rush to copy it. If it's struck down, opponents will rewrite it, refile it, and try again under a new name. The battle doesn't end with a gavel. It restarts with the next bill, the next lawsuit, the next election. And that's the quiet truth most Americans never hear. Gun rights aren't lost in one moment. They're eroded one case at a time. The courtroom in Oregon might seem far away, but what happens there will shape what happens in your city, your county, your state. Because if rights can be narrowed there, they can be narrowed anywhere. And history has shown one thing again and again. Freedom rarely disappears all at once. It fades while people are watching, thinking it could never happen to them. So don't just watch this case, remember it. Because what's at stake isn't just a law, or a magazine limit, or a permit rule. It's the very definition of what liberty still means in America. If you believe this fight matters, don't just scroll past. Share this story. Comment your thoughts below. And subscribe, because on the Firearms Legal Desk, we're tracking every ruling, every challenge, and every courtroom battle that threatens your rights, before they reach your doorstep.